Okay, you join me where we resume halfway through chapter 4. And Lily is being taken by Madame Verdigris on a Zepp, a passenger Zepp, rather than her father's private airship. She's just been told that her father has gone missing, and Madame Verdigris is taking her back to the village where she came from, having picked her up from the girls' finishing school. So let's find out what happens next to Lily. Welcome to the Damselfly, an LZ-1 model Zeppelin. A stocky mechanical porter in a blue uniform displaying the gold insignia of the Royal Dirigible Company jumped down from their Zepp's doorway. Lily brightened at the sight of him. He had a funny-looking thick moustache made from a tufty old clothes brush, buckled under his polished nose. And when he ran down the gangway, his leg pistons clacked together and his long iron arms swung through the air. He reached the edge of the platform and, gathering the heavier trunks, 2 under each arm, carried them like they were the lightest parcels and stowed them neatly in stacks in the hold of the airship. Then, collecting the ticket stubs, he chatted with the passengers in turn, as if each were a bosom pal who he hadn't seen in years. When he finally arrived at the spot where they were standing, he gave a creaky little bow and tipped his hat to Madame, so that Lily saw the polished brass top of his bald head. "Ladies, might I see your tickets, please?" "First class section," Madame Verdigris said, handing them over. He checked the scrawl. "Miss Lily Grantham?" Lily nodded, looking down at the tickets in the mechanical's hands, and spotting a gleaming brass plate on his forearm, which said, "Hartman and Silverfish Limited, First Class Mechanicals and Mechanimals." "But oh, you were made by my Madame Verdigris pinched the top of Lily's arm hard. "By John Hartman, the famous inventor," the mechanical said proudly. "Are you any relation?" "None whatsoever," Madame Verdigris replied, before Lily had even opened her mouth. "Perhaps you should get on with your job." He gave her a curt nod. "Of course, madame. Very good. Hand luggage only. May I show you both to your seats?" He took Lily's case and winked at her. Or was it an error in his blinking? "This way, please. Mind your step." The mechanical ushered them along the gangplank towards the Damselfly, and Lily glanced back one more time at the air station. As she did, she noticed a man clutching a lacquer walking cane arrive and join the back of the queue of boarding passengers. His razor-thin figure was clothed in a dark wool suit and tall stovepipe hat, and he wore silver-reflective O-shaped spectacles. Something about him seemed oddly familiar. He was, she thought, somehow connected to Papa, but she couldn't quite place him. She was still trying to put a name to his craggy face when she stepped into the corridor of the airship's gondola, and he disappeared from sight. In the compartment, Madame installed herself by the window, while Lily waited for the mechanical porter to stow her suitcase. When he'd finished, the mechanical man doffed his hat to her, and Lily shook his hand before he slid the compartment door shut and left. Madame Verdigris settled back in her seat and tutted under her breath. "I don't know why you shake hands with them, Lily. You'll end up covered in the engine oil, or worse." "It's good manners," Lily said. "They only want to be treated like people." "Mon Dieu! Where do you get these notions? Certainly not from that skull of yours." Madame opened her carpet bag and took out some embroidery, a picture of Botticelli angels. In the confines of the cabin, her perfume was almost unendurable. Lily reached for the window latch. Madame put out a hand. "Arrêtez-vous." "Why?" "I cannot stand the sound of propellers, and I hate to be battered by cold air when I travel. Not to mention the evil stink of smoke you'll let in." Lily bristled. Why was Madame making such demands, and why had she asked Lily to deny she knew Papa? Now, after everything. "Why did you tell the porter?" "Oh, why did you tell the porter I wasn't related to John Hartman?" she asked. "Your father never liked revealing your identity." "Does it matter now?" "Do you want everyone knowing our business? Especially Max. and especially now your father's gone. Lily shook her head, but she felt a pang of pain in her chest. I just don't see how it's your right to answer questions addressed to me, she said. Well, I do, Madame replied. I'm your guardian, maintenant, albeit temporarily, and until we find out what's being decided, I suggest we stick to the old rules. So please, sit back and try to keep quiet. We have a long journey ahead. Lily did as she was told, though she would have preferred it to be someone more pleasant doing the telling. She ignored the housekeeper and contented herself with staring out the window at the view. Damselfly's engines shuddered to life, and it was winched by 2 large steam wagons to the centre of the landing strip. They positioned it over a big X, directly under the take-off skylight. Then the mooring ropes were unclipped, and the Zepp rose through the centre of the building, aided by gigantic wind pumps in the walls, pushing it upwards. Lily watched through the compartment's porthole as the Zepp drifted past the metal struts that held up the glass-paned roof, and the roosting pigeons, who barely shifted as they floated by. Last time she'd flown with Papa, she'd been arriving here for the start of the autumn term. Then the evenings had been light and long, not dark and heavy, as they were now. Lily was flying without him, and she felt danger at every turn. As the public Zepp swept into the starless sky, she wondered what had happened to Papa and Malkin. How, with such an unfeeling guardian as Madame watching over her, would she ever find out? Suddenly, she felt very alone and scared about her future. Chapter 5. They'd not been travelling long when a knock at the corridor window made Lily glance up from her penny dreadful. It was the thin fellow in the mirrored spectacles from the air station platform, with a copy of the Daily Cog clasped under his arm. When he slid open the door and peered in, Lily gave a loud gasp, for the mirrors were not glasses, as she supposed, but lenses sewn into the raw red sockets of his eyes. The man had no eyeballs. He stared at the ticket in his black-gloved hand, then examined the brass numbers above the seats, his mirrors reflecting everything. "Excuse me, madame. Miss, I appear to be allocated to this cabin. May I come in?" Lily shook her head, but Madame Verdigris replied, "Certainly." "Thank you, much obliged." The thin man settled himself in a spare seat and leaned his walking cane against the wall. Lily noticed its silver skull handle. He took off his hat and gloves and placed them on his lap. "Sorry for the disturbance, ladies." "Please pay it no mind," Madame Verdigris returned to her embroidery, absently poking her needle through the eye of an appliqued cherub. The thin man unfolded his newspaper and smoothed the wrinkles from it. He opened it to arm's length and began to read the inside pages. Lily could not stop staring at his face. Perhaps he'd been in an accident, for the rims of his eye sockets around the mirrors looked red with damage, and his cheeks were scarred with jagged marks. She decided he must be a hybrid, part human, part machine. She'd never seen one before. Until now, she'd never even been sure they existed. Underneath her revulsion, she felt a little sorry for the man. It must be a difficult life to be singled out as different like that. She was probably looking too much. She turned her attention to the paper instead. It was the evening edition. Lily scanned the front page and gave a gasp. The lead article was about Papa's disappearance. She read the first 2 paragraphs. The Daily Cog. Professor Hartman missing, presumed dead. 9th of November, 1896. 1 penny. John Hartman, co-inventor of the modern mechanical and infamous recluse, was travelling on board his private airship Dragonfly yesterday when she disappeared. The ship failed to land at its stated destination of Bracken Bridge air station and is thought to have combusted in a mid-air explosion. Authorities are currently searching the crash site in order to retrieve as much information as possible. Prominent in the field of mechanical design, Professor Hartman co-owned the country's largest mechanical manufacturing business with his friend and colleague, Professor Silverfish. but he forfeited his share of his business and vanished from public life 7 years ago, when his wife was killed in a steam wagon crash. He leaves one surviving relative, a daughter, Lily, aged 13, whose current whereabouts are unknown. Our reporter, Anna Quinn, has attempted to contact the family. A lump welled in Lily's throat, and she stopped reading. It was all true then, written there in black and white. She glanced at the thin man, his head lolled against the headrest, his chin tipped back. Was he watching her, or sleeping? So hard to tell behind those lidless, mirrored eyes. She gave a cough, but he didn't move. Perhaps he really was asleep. He wasn't reading the paper anymore. It drooped now in his hands. She stuck her tongue out at him, and he flashed her a smile, sharp as a shark's. "I must apologise again," he said, folding the Daily Cog and setting it aside. "I know how frustrating a stranger in one's cabin can be on long journeys." Lily gave a timid nod. She seemed to take as an invitation to continue. "Odd they put us together when the Zepp's so empty. Must be a mechanical error." Madame Verdigris set aside her embroidery. "Was it the same mechanical potter who showed you aboard? I find these primitive mechanicals, with their synthesized emotions, most disagreeable, don't you? They make so many clerical errors. And with the back talk they give you, and all the winding, I'm often surprised they function at all." "Quite true, madame. You've hit the nail squarely on the head there." The thin man smiled. "Or should I say, got to the heart of the matter." Madame Verdigris gave her tinkling cut-glass laugh. Though Lily saw nothing funny about either of their remarks, it occurred to her that the thin man had twice addressed the housekeeper as Madame, not Madame, and she wondered how he knew the woman's preferred title. The thin man leaned forward, his silver eyes flashing in the light. "Ladies, please allow me to introduce myself. My name is Mr. Roach." Madame Verdigris nodded to him. "Bonsoir, Mr. Roach. I'm Madame Verdigris, and this is my charge, Miss Hartman." "Ah, like the article?" Mr. Roach asked, tapping the newspaper. Madame Verdigris somberly inclined her head in the affirmative. Lily ground her teeth. Hadn't the housekeeper just told her to not let people know who she was? "You look upset, young lady," Mr. Roach said, "and no wonder." "I'm fine," she said. "I've something here might cheer you up." Mr. Roach put a hand in his pocket and pulled out a paper bag, which he held out to Lily. She peered inside. Striped gooey sweets were fused to the paper. They must have been in his pocket for weeks. "No thank you, sir." "Go on, they're humbugs." He thrust the paper bag at her, but she shook her head. "What's the matter? You don't like humbugs? If I wasn't such a mild-mannered fellow, I might be offended. Perhaps you think I'd be better off eating carrots. Good for the old eyesight." He laughed and tapped the centre of one mirrored eye with a finger. Lily felt a shiver rise up her back. "No," she said, "it's not that, only—" She studied his unreadable expression. She didn't even know how to put it politely, but she needn't have worried. Madame Verdigris stepped in on her behalf. "I'm afraid, sir, one rule of Miss Scrimshaw's Academy, where Miss Hartman is a pupil, is never to accept sweets from strangers." "Sorry," Lily added. Mr. Roach frowned, the silver orbs of his eyes narrowing. He clutched the paper bag in a gaunt hand. "You could hardly call me a stranger, Miss Hartman. We've just introduced ourselves. I must say, I don't believe your rules apply in these circumstances, and one should never be without a humbug when one takes a long journey. I find they help with travel sickness on these commuter Zepps." Lily relented and took one, and Mr. Roach gave a small, victorious grin. The humbug tasted delicious, but after a while her eyelids drooped, and she felt rather tired. She put her head against the frosty window, which thrummed and rattled with the Zeppelin's engines, and watched her breath cloud the glass. Before she drifted off, she heard Madame Verdigris say, "I don't know why these Zeps are so loud anyways. Where is the refinement one gets with that old-fashioned horse and carriage, or a hot air balloon?" "Change is always monstrous at first," Mr. Roach replied, "but people soon get used to it. You know, I've the strongest feeling, Madame Hortense, there will be a lot of changes in your life these coming months, for better or worse, depending on how you play your hand. I'll be watching closely to see how you handle things." Lily tried to fathom the meaning of his words, but found them slippery and ungraspable, and they swam away from her like a shoal of silver fish, pulling her along into a fog of sleep. When she came to, the Zepp was approaching a local air station, and Mr. Roach was gone. She suddenly remembered he'd been far too familiar with Madame, his last words tinged with a threat of some kind. "What happened to the fellow sitting opposite?" Lily asked, stifling a yawn. "He left a few minutes ago to prepare for landing," Madame said. "He had an urgent appointment and wanted to disembark first." "But how did he know your first name?" "Pardon?" Madame seemed somewhat flustered. She tucked her needle into the edge of her embroidery, and Lily noticed she'd filled in the cherub's eyes with silver circles of thread. "I heard him use your first name," Lily repeated, "and he knew you were called Madame before you even gave him your title." "What an odd thing to say!" The housekeeper let out a peal of laughter. "You must have dreamed it." She gathered her spools of threads and tucked them into her bag next to her needlework. "You were asleep for so long, Lily. In fact, you've tousled your hair. Perhaps you'd better tidy yourself before we arrive." Lily was tempted to pursue the subject further, but the airship had begun its descent towards the landing site, and soon the familiar shabby sign of Bracken Bridge air station appeared, lighting up the cabin. She struggled into her coat and scarf, and a few minutes later they disembarked onto the tiny local platform. A cold wind buffeted them as they descended the gangplank and took the wooden steps towards ground level. Papa's mechanical driver, Captain Springer, was waiting to collect them at the entrance to the station, standing beside their steam wagon. Lily recognised him at once from his bow legs and bent stance. As soon as Madame Verdigris had wound him up, he hobbled over and gave Lily a big, creaky hug. "By all that ticks," he cried, "it's good to see you, Lily." Then he huffed and puffed on his wooden legs, his cogs clicking as he loaded her case into the cab and helped Madame to her seat. Climbing in after them, Lily glanced back at the other departing passengers, all wrapped up against the cold. She searched among the faces for Mr. Roach, but couldn't find him anywhere. He seemed to have melted into the night. The journey to the house took less than half an hour, but Lily stayed awake the whole time, thinking about the silver-eyed man and how he connected to Madame. Captain Springer pulled the steam wagon onto the drive of Bracken Bridge Manor, and Lily and Madame stepped down onto the frosty path. As they walked towards the door, Lily glanced through the black skeletal trees of the garden, their branches like cracks in the sky, up to Papa's study window, where his lamp once burned late into the night while he worked on his projects. She half expected to see the flicker of it now, but there was nothing. The window stayed dark. An icy draught whisked across the grounds, throwing up the last few fallen leaves, and a flood of grief made Lily swallow hard. Batting away the dust and the cold sting, she followed Madame and Captain Springer towards the low-lit porch. Madame took out a ring of keys, unlocked the front door, and ushered Lily inside. She nodded at Captain Springer to indicate he would stow the case in the vestibule beside the rack of Papa's old walking shoes. To see them made Lily's heart leap for a second. Their folded leather shapes and straggly laces laid out beneath his everyday coat on its hook. It was almost as if he had just come in and left them there. But no. He would have taken his flying jacket and boots if he and Malkin had gone off in Dragonfly. There were just the things he left behind, the remnants of him. Her heart cracked some more as she realised he was truly gone, and the thought cut deep. She took a breath and stepped through the glass door from the vestibule into the grand hall. She was still half expecting the old cosy warmth of the house to greet her. But if anything, it felt colder and darker in here than outside. At the foot of the stairs, Mrs. Rust, the mechanical cook, awaited them. She must have stood there for the whole day, for she wound down and was now frozen in an expectant pose, one hand resting on the curved banister. Lily walked towards her. Apart from Malkin, Mrs. Rust had always been her favourite among Papa's mechanicals, but since Lily had seen her last, her old metal face had become more worn. Scores of worry lines crossed her rusty forehead, and her nose ballooned with new chips of paint. Madame Verdigris sent Captain Springer jittering across the tiled hall and off along the darkened servants' corridor. Then she examined Mrs. Rust. Mon Dieu! She tutted. These old models, it stopped again. She strode around behind the mechanical woman. Pulling out her ring of keys once more, she searched through for Mrs. Rust's unique winder and inserted it into the mechanical's neck, turning it viciously until Lily heard the springs inside the Iron Lady begin to creak and groan. When Madame finished the winding, she stepped back and waited. Mrs. Rust's eyes sprung open. Her expression looked glazed for a moment, the way mechanicals' faces always did when you woke them. But then she blinked, caught sight of Lily, and let out a joyful cry. Cogs and chronometers! My Tiger Lil's back! Mrs. Rust scooped Lily into her arms, sweeping her feet off the floor. How I have missed you, dear heart! I've missed you too, Rusty. Lily kissed the mechanical's dented metal cheek, which was rough, rouged with paint, and smelled slightly of lavender oil. Mrs. Rust put her down and took a good look at her. Then her face became serious and she let out a long wheezing sigh. Oh, Lily, she said, I'm so sorry about your father, poor John. By all that ticks, I don't know what we'll do without him. Hearing Mrs. Rust say Papa's name like that made Lily's heart flutter. Me neither, she said wearily, and she leaned up to kiss her on the nose. Madame Verdigris gave a discreet cough. How have things been getting on here, Mrs. Rust? I trust you took care of everything before you wound down for the night. Yes, ma'am. Sorry, ma'am. I didn't realise I'd run out of clicks before you'd arrived. But you took so long. Malheureusement, the Zeppelin was delayed, Madame said. Foul weather. Storm clouds on the line.